The invasion of Ukraine by Russia this year has disrupted the world's energy markets and led to food shortages in some regions. As energy prices rise and trigger a recession in Europe, the disruptions could become more severe over the winter, damaging the economies of the US and many other countries. There is still a chance for a wider and more deadly confrontation. China would be involved in a war that would be significantly worse. The recent visit to Taiwan by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi infuriated the Communist government of China, which has since fired missiles over the island and held ominous military drills to warn the world that China intends to take Taiwan eventually, either peacefully or forcibly. That would undoubtedly harm the world economy and markets more than any military fight since World War II if it featured armed combat. China's formidable manufacturing sector is closely tied to economies around the world, including those in the United States and Europe, unlike Russia or Ukraine. Some of the busiest shipping lanes in the world may be found in the seas surrounding China and Taiwan. It would be disastrous to disrupt all of that business during a war. For instance, before Russia invaded Ukraine, annual U.S. commerce with Russia totaled $36 billion. $4 billion in annual trade with Ukraine or $40 billion in direct trade was put at risk by the conflict. China and the United States conduct $656 billion worth of annual trade, which includes components for many items built in the United States, as well as consumer goods found in every American home. The $114 billion in trade between the United States and Taiwan includes some of the most sophisticated semiconductors produced today. Trade between the United States and China and Taiwan combined is 10 times more than that with Russia and Ukraine, and it involves significantly more economically significant goods. China, Taiwan, and the majority of the developed economies around the world are all interdependent on one another. In their latest book, Danger Zone: The Coming Conflict with China, Hal Brands and Michael Beckley claim that should a war break out, the economic repercussions will be severe. A global depression would be all but assured, they continue. Over the weekend, China conducted live-fire drills around Taiwan to mimic an economic blockade, with Chinese forces stationed to prevent access to the island's principal ports. Difficulty zones in the Taiwan Strait and around the island's eastern seaboard led dozens of ships traveling to or from North Asia to change their course or slow down. Normally, 240 ships every day pass through the region on average. However, the display of China's military might, demonstrating how simple it would be to cut off Taiwan's access to the rest of the world via the sea and the air, helped to highlight China's own economic weakness. Trade financing and insurance for all shipping in the region would vanish if the United States challenged a true Chinese blockade and the Taiwan Strait was declared a war zone. Since China's major ports of Shanghai, Dalian, Tianjin, and others depend on transit through waters close to Taiwan, any actual blockage of the sea lanes to the east and west of Taiwan would have a devastating impact on China's own economy. The Taiwan Strait serves as a major shipping route connecting North Asia, which includes China, Japan, and Korea, with the rest of the world. It also serves as the shortest route connecting South China with the United States. The vast majority of Australia's iron ore exports, as well as those to Japan and Korea, pass through Taiwan on their way to the northern Chinese bulk ports. According to a Bloomberg analysis, in the first 7 months of this year, just under half of all container ships in the globe went across the Taiwan Strait. 88% of the top 10% of the world's container fleet use the canal. Every day, tankers traveling through the strait transport about 1 million barrels of oil. Earlier this year, the Chinese Foreign Ministry claimed that the Taiwan Strait was not an international waterway and that China had sovereignty, sovereign powers, and authority over the Taiwan Strait. China's military actions support its assertions. As an international waterway where high seas freedoms, including freedom of navigation and overflight, are guaranteed under international law, the U.S. State Department responded. The Chinese military drill also grounded commercial flights, while other carriers like Japan Airlines and Cathay Pacific indicated they were avoiding the designated zones. Flights to Taipei were suspended by Korean Air, Singapore Airlines, and Asiana Airlines. Although military drills and war zones are frequently avoided by airlines, a blockade of Taiwan's airspace would have a significant negative impact on the country's economy. Instead of being transported by sea, a sizable portion of Taiwan's exports is transported by air. Taiwan is without a doubt the world's leading manufacturer of integrated circuits, producing 63% of all microchips under contract worldwide. The majority of those microchips are produced by TSMC, which is a major supplier to Apple, Intel, Qualcomm, and Nvidia. 92% of the market for expensive integrated circuits, smaller than 10 nanometers, is held by Taiwan. An ecosystem of silicon wafers, packaging, and other components for integrated circuits exists alongside their manufacture. Taiwan is a significant supplier of other high-tech and expensive equipment, and its annual integrated circuit export revenue is roughly $140 billion. A little more than half of Taiwan's integrated circuit exports go to China. The majority of China's exports of electronic goods are made up of chips from Taiwan. Concerns about Taiwan's semiconductor industry's future in the event of a confrontation with China were a factor in the U.S. Senate's weekend approval of a $280 billion plan to support local chip production. Companies that accept the substantial funds must promise not to modernize their Chinese plants for 10 years. In response to U.S. concerns, TSMC constructed a fabrication facility in Arizona for $12 billion. Any extended blockade of Taiwan would seem insignificant in comparison to the interruption of microchip supplies during the COVID-19 crisis. According to a Hinrich Foundation study of the Taiwanese microchip industry, after cars and crude and refined oil, integrated circuits are currently the fourth most trafficked category of goods. For Australia, Taiwan is a significant trading partner. After China, Japan, Korea, and India, it is its fifth largest export market. In 2017, it spent $16.2 billion on goods, primarily coal, iron ore, natural gas, and other resources. Taiwan is Australia's eighth largest importer, with cigarettes, computers, mobile phones, and refined petroleum as its top four imports. Australia is a tiny importer of Taiwanese integrated circuits due to the absence of indigenous electronics industry, but it imports a substantial amount of electronics, white goods, and cars from other countries that contain significant Taiwanese content. The possibility that any blockade would be challenged suggests that not only Taiwanese trade, but also the massive flow of resources into and manufactured goods out of China's northern ports would be impeded. The lack of access to Chinese manufactured goods would be the biggest source of economic upheaval for Australia, whose manufacturing, retail, and construction sectors are strongly dependent on imports from China, as shown by ASBI's analysis of such a scenario. Even though the resource sector would be destroyed, it employs a small number of people, and the financial markets might be able to make up for the lost export revenue, at least temporarily. The experience of Russia under Western sanctions has also demonstrated that the largest source of economic hardship is not the restriction on exports, but rather the loss of imports. The loss of trade through the Taiwan Strait would have a far greater global impact than Russia's conflict in Ukraine.